Welcome to Inspired Learning, the Path of Exile podcast with Badger and Yoji. My name is Badger.
And my name is Yoji. Wait, what? Wait.
And my name is Badger.
My name is Yoji.
Yeah, good. And we're joined by... Now I'm confused.
QT.
Rise QT.
Yeah.
Wait, what does that say on the screen? It says... Yeah, that does say Rise QT. We're joined by Rise QT today. Thank you so much, Rise, for coming. How is being devilishly tall going?
Okay, this is a bit boring now. So,
No, we are joined by Tarke. Thank you so much for coming, Tarke. We had you on the second ever episode of Inspired Learning, and now you're back to talk all things game balance with us today, which is going to be pretty fun. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I do just want to say briefly that the reason why I'm on this episode is like 8 episodes ago, you said I want to do a topic on this. Yeah. I hit you guys up because at the time, 8 episodes ago, I had a lot to say about it. And I was thinking about this earlier. I can't actually remember anything I wanted to say about this thing that I felt very passionately about like 2 months ago. Yeah. But I'm here.
I think we made an offhand comment on maybe the end of an episode or something like that about kind of like game balance in like an ever-evolving game and that sort of thing, and you know how nerfs and buffs might be, you know, needed or not needed, or, you know, arguments around that. And Tarke was like, yes, let's do an episode. And we were like, yes, let's do it. And now,
I mean,
now we're here.
There was like some kind of stuff in between where I like came back on it and you were like, my stuff's kind of not working. I just moved. So we're like postponed.
I did kind of like move. Like, to be fair, you did try and get me on like a month ago, but yeah.
But now we're here. So that's pretty good.
Yeah. But yeah, before we get into things, how is everything going? How's the new place? How are you doing? And
the new place is nice. It's good being able to not be like, oh, my bed is there. That's been the main thing really, is just being able, like, I will go up to sleep, and having that separation of space is really nice. Yeah, no, it's been really good. PoE, I keep struggling to like get back into it. I was really into PoE before the move, and then I moved, and then I was like, oh, I'll start again in SSF, and then I played for like 2 days, and now since then I've started to learn how to code, and that's just way more interesting than playing PoE. So waiting for the next league to come out, and then I'll like do some more PoE things.
Yeah, I'm looking at our topic list that Yoji's got here for us today, and I noticed that all of the stuff about the ultimatum teasers and everything like that are right at the bottom. But I kind of want to start with everyone's opinions on those small teasers that we've got. I'm just throwing a wrench in there.
Into the topic list.
Yeah.
And it's just like, bam, shattered. Okay. I'll
get it out of the way so we can get it out of the way so we can talk about the juice of this episode. You know, just some quick fire stuff, right? Right. But yeah, how are you feeling, Tarke, about what has been teased so far? And do you have, not that you can say anything, but do you know anything more?
Sort of. So they're doing the announcement stream, and we're doing a live Bay class with Rory, which will be really fun. Usually what they do, I say usually, they've only done this once before because they've only done this reveal stream. So last time what they'll do is they'll send everything to Ziggy about a week before, and then Ziggy writes up like his questions for the Q&A. And then Ziggy's slightly more responsible than I am, so he gets it a week before, I get it like the day before, then I get all the information, and then I write up my topic list of Bay class. So I'm still waiting to pass the 24-hour mark before, so I don't really know that much. What I do know, which I'm pretty sure I can say, and if I can't, oh well, too late. I was talking with someone yesterday, not Bex, for once, and they were saying that there's something in 3.14 being added that apparently I complained about not being in the game once, and they were curious if I will work out what it was. And now I'm going to feel really bad if I don't know what it was, because I like the idea of some poor person like being like, we have to get this in so Tarke stops complaining, and then they add it, and I'm like, no idea what that is. So it could be anything.
If you see it and you don't even remember that you complained
so
about.
Hopefully it's something cool, and hopefully it's something I'm like, oh yeah.
Luckily, the list of things that Tarke ever complained about on PoE stuff
it's a very,
is like super
very
short.
small list.
Yeah, so it should be really easy to figure out.
It's tiny. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you have, an absolute, very solid idea of what it could be. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other good thing about me not really knowing what it is it means that whatever the best feature of 3.14 is, I'm like, that was my idea. Yeah, that was the one. That was the one. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You called it years ago, Tarke. Yeah.
But as for the actual small reveal we did see, I think it looks interesting. I'm definitely just saying it's a crafting league, just because to me those altar statue things had items on top of them. Yeah. So it's it's a crafting league. They nerfed Harvest. It would make sense. We're not going to talk about Harvest. Sorry to that to you, but it makes sense that you make those changes with crafting in mind. It's going to be a crafting league. Hopefully, it also comes with smart loot stuff. Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a crafting league of some kind, and curious to see more about it. I also feel like it could also be one of those things where with the whole ultimatum thing, I feel like it's one of those things where the little GIF they showed us could be so far removed from the actual mechanic, because it's one of those things of we don't want to GGG's very good at being it's gonna be this, and then it's something wildly different. So I could also kind of see it being remember when they released Bestium, we're wait, Pokemon League? I wouldn't be surprised if all that statue stuff was just a meme, and actually it's Dinosaur League or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying not to read into it, yeah.
If you compare it to the Ritual teaser, which was kind of the only other teaser that we've ever gotten in the same sense that we got some video footage beforehand, that actually, if you went back to it and looked at it after we knew what it is, it actually showed pretty well what the league was about. There were 2 scenes with the Ritual altars. You could clearly see the altar, you could see the circle, you could see the effects that were happening. There was one with the purple lightning things fly around. It was actually pretty obvious what it could be, and I think if they did it the same thing with this teaser, then it would probably be something to do with the statues and something very obvious with a circular stuff with mob spawning, what we've seen. Just taking it from how they treated the teaser last time, how they treated this time. If they did it similarly, then it would probably be centered around these statue things somehow. But it's really hard to tell. They could GG have been known to throw us some red herrings and lead us astray with one extra act turning out as a few more stuff like that. Yeah. Oh, apparently I have follow notifications in this thing. That's interesting.
Yes.
First time with the OBS camera.
Yoji got a follower. That's pretty great. Thank you so much for the follow to Yoji's channel, whoever that was. I do appreciate that. Yeah. No, I kind of am just going to reiterate what Tarke said. I pretty much see it as a crafting league from what we've been given. It could just be a curveball with everything, but it very much looks like that. I was playing around with the picture of whoever this character is, whoever this NPC is that we see in the trailer, holding red and blue, whatever they represent. I'm thinking, just crazy thinking, chaos and order. Red has always been kind of this chaos, this Val, and that sort of thing. Some sort of chaos and order happening there. I don't know what that even means, but I could see it representing maybe something in terms of choosing crafting outcomes based on either chaos or order or something like that in a league mechanic. That could be kind of interesting. Yeah, I'm fairly certain that due to some Harvest news that we did have, that there's something else coming. We'll just have to see. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff about Val and everything, a lot of symbolism and all that kind of stuff. So we're getting some rehash of the lore or something more in the lore or anything like that, definitely.
One thing I can say on that, which in the speculation front, so for the reveal Bay class as part of the live stream, normally what will happen is when it comes to dev episodes, they'll ask you oh, is there anyone particularly you'd want to get on? We weren't asked. It was you're gonna get Rory. So that suggests there'll be quite a big focus on skill stuff with the whole Val thing. Maybe a Val skill rework could be really interesting.
That's what I thought as
really
well.
Cool.
Because when did they do that big rework? It was quite a while ago now, wasn't it?
The Val skill
rework of Val stuff?
That's that's a long time ago.
Very long time, yeah.
So it's pretty heavily Val themed could be a cool time to like either just expand the system, adding in more Val gems, or maybe like going back and changing the systems. I don't know, I think that could be really fun.
Yeah, I definitely see that. Yeah.
That would be kind of nice. Like, I think we've been asking for new Val skills basically since like a few patches after they were introduced, because whenever they added new skills, like, oh, it would be cool that had a Val skill. And especially now, since they're not as problematic anymore as they were for quite some time, I think would be a pretty good and safe time to add some new ones. Like during the whole Val Fireball, Val Spark meta, and also like when people were perma Val hasting and stuff, I can see them being like, that system is already problematic enough. Don't want to add another 50 skills to that.
Yeah. They've never not that. I was gonna say Val skills have never really recovered since that big nerf, but then I don't think recovered is the right word, because that was not a great, in my opinion, not a great kind of gameplay aspect. The whole, full Val uptime and everything like that. I don't know. That's just an opinion of mine, but
I mean, the game was very different back then, because that was back when the game was just speed clear maps, wear a bright beacon every build, whereas now it's like kill bosses, and the game's sort of like kill boss build. So even if you wanted to do like a perma Vol Spark, Vol Fireball build, yes, if you had enough gear, you could like brute force it. But a lot more builds these days care about like what's your single target, what's your recovery, not just like how quick do you shield charge. Yeah. So that would be another reason for them to like go back and revisit it, because the game is much different, so it's much safer to like make that stuff more impactful.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
And also, now that I think about it, there aren't actually that many widely used Val skills anymore. I think a lot of the Val skills that we currently have are kind of like fallen a bit out of the meta or out of favor. There are a few ones that are like pretty heavily used still, like Val Discipline because of the utility. I think Val Molten Shell is still used, just not
mostly utility,
as much anymore.
That we see.
I mean, that's stuff like Val Double Strike, which is like a great single target for melee builds if you're lacking that. There are like some things, but there are also other skills that are barely used unless you happen to be playing the main skill. And even Val Earthquake is in a really, really awkward spot now, because the Val version doesn't scale with the Fist of War and stuff that you link to the normal version anymore.
Yeah.
Also, if you really want to like go down this theory thing, the Val rework happened before the PoE2 gem system, whereas now we know what the new gem system is, and the whole thing with how links work is you now have to link the gem. And I was always saying, like, how difficult is it going to be to get like a level 21 Val Fireball 6 link? So the whole way that like corrupting 20 to 21 gems, that might be changing potentially. Like, I mean, that is very speculation, and that is something which is like 3 years away or whatever. But like,
but it might be something they like, if they would rework a system now, they already know the PoE2 system is like whatever it is currently, the iteration that they're working on. They'll keep that in mind. They wouldn't implement a new system now that is in conflict with PoE2, because that would just make them, they would just making work for themselves, basically. That makes no sense. So
yeah.
Also, and, there will be some PoE2 info as well.
That is really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I have like absolutely no idea what it actually will be, honestly.
I'm suspecting just maybe another short trailer and a speculative beta announcement for a long time away or something like that. Something speculative, something to just, I don't know, spoon feed us a little bit of. Spoon feed the community like, hey, we are still working on this. It's coming. It might be coming in this time frame, because we just don't really know anything at this point, after everything that's happened this year and all the delays. So I don't know. We could be getting quite a bit more than that, but
I think we'll see a fair amount, but I do think that if they add a date to anything, that's a massive mistake.
Yeah, that's really risky.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a few different people at ExileCon and afterwards when they like announced like end of the year, and they were like, wait, why is that there? Like, I don't think that's going to be ready for them. So yeah, I don't know. I think anything with deadlines is incredibly risky. I mean, obviously it's a little bit different in places like New Zealand, because it's kind of like COVID, what's that? Meanwhile, in like a lot of other parts of the world, we're still being absolutely ravaged by it.
Yeah.
Well, in one sense, in New Zealand, COVID, what's that, is correct, but also it is hitting them pretty hard not being able to hire overseas.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know multiple people who are meant to be going over there who can't, because they're in a country who it's still COVID, yes, that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think anything with deadlines would be a real mistake. But
that's true. Yeah.
I would probably hope to see more of, because we know that they finished Act 2, and I can't remember if they said they finished Act 3 or not. But we've only seen bits of Act 1. We haven't seen all of Act 1. So I would probably expect to see maybe like a spooky boss from Act 1, like the equivalent of like the Merveil fight, maybe some like Act 2 terrains, because we saw a little bit of PoE 2, like that bridge thing, which I think confused a lot of people. That is PoE 2. And that didn't look like anything that I saw in the PoE 1 demo, unless it's the there was this whole thing with like PoE 1 with like you're like going down a castle or something, unless that's like the bottom thing, because there was like that crystal or something. I can't remember exactly. It's been a while, but like we were meant to be heading towards this weird. Do you remember vaguely this, Badger? Like there was this thing. So unless that leads to that like the room, I'd imagine it's going to be like show a cool new boss.
The style's too disconnected for. But it might be like, Act 3, something or other.
Yeah, because like all of Act 1 was like spooky crypts, and that was more like thaumaturgy, science.
Yeah.
So So
I think it reminded me a bit of like some of the things, because we've got new maps that clearly lend assets from PoE 2, and there's like the Crimson Township, for example, which kind of got the same vibe, like the thaumaturgy, cultist type of vibe. Maybe it's something like that. That's what I was reminded of when I saw it. So yeah, I would expect definitely like see a bit more of the campaign, like what they've done, like a few more, maybe like a boss or two, or like some footage, and maybe also, I don't know, like another sneak peek of like an Ascendancy they are pretty set on keeping, because there's a lot of Ascendancy stills, and they have shown like the rough direction of a few, like the melee bow thing, and what was the other one, the shape-shifting focused one, the ranger one, and they hinted at like a lightning mana focus Templar, stuff like that. They then mentioned a lot of stuff. Maybe they'll like have another few of those to mention.
That would surprise me a lot more. I think anything like that is much more we'll see where we're at the time. I think it would be more like that we'd see like zones, bosses. Maybe we'd see like a new feature, like an actual like flagship feature that I could definitely see. But I think anything numerical or anything even close to numerical would be a big like no-no. So I don't think we'd see any Ascendancy stuff. I think a lot of that is still just like up in the air for them. So yeah, I don't know. That's just speculation.
Yeah, I can see that.
It is pretty much just speculation right now. I
mean, that's what all we got.
Or
that's all we got. No.
All
right. But like I'm gonna move on. But is it? I have to ask that one question, Tarke. Is it speculation or is it truth? You're on the spot.
I don't know. Yeah.
No, I was going to make one more comment on. You mentioned very quickly a little bit ago, Tarke, about like smart loot and that sort of thing as well. Do we think that we're going to get any? Well, actually, I can kind of assume that we're going to get some form of smart loot in some way in 3.14 because we've experienced it in Heist, we've experienced it in Ritual. They're experimenting, right? They're trying to figure out what works best. Do we think there's going to be a larger implementation of smart loot, and that could potentially tie to some more Path of Exile 2 news about like this is a system that we're trialing, right?
Yo, smart exalts.
Yeah, smart exalts. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I'm very much on the train. I've been saying this to chat as well. Like I'm not that I'm expecting, but I'm very much hoping that we're getting a much larger implementation of smart loot this patch. That might be too big for just another league, but it would be really cool to see. And it would
think we'll
also
keep
make a
heading
lot
in
of
that
sense
direction.
for
I don't think we'd see anything big. I mean, they might do. You never know. But I am expecting to see more and more of the little bits here and there. But I definitely think that because it's not only one of the things of smart loot, but they need to like cut all the bases, and they've said they want to cut all the bases before. So it might be a case of like, depending on what the big new skill archetype is they push. Because remember they push a new archetype, then like rune daggers, and then they like cut half the daggers and staves. Like we'll see a couple more of those.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
Yep. There's also a base item rework coming with PvE2, right? I remember.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they're adding new
Yeah.
bases in PvE2 as well, which is weird.
Yeah.
I was rewatching one of their demos. So from the pre-show, I was talking about procedural animation. I'm like, I swear I heard PvE talk about they're not doing procedural animation, they're doing like fake procedural animation. Very briefly, anyone who hasn't watched the panels, is like they've got 3 different like run states, and they'll match the run state based on like if you have a Quicksilver up or not, like that, so it feels like more smooth.
Yeah.
And they showed off some art, like this is the new shaman something vest. I think it was shaman vest or whatever. So they're adding a bunch of new bases in PvE2, and it's like you need to get rid of some before you start adding. Like let's calm down a bit there.
Yeah. We're still, we're still heading in a direction with Path of Exile, and for someone like myself who has played the game for a long time, and you can just kind of learn every league as it comes. We are, it's getting pretty bloated, and just adding on top of it, more base items and everything like that. I'm sure that there's probably going to be some culling of stuff as well. You would hope so, right?
Yeah.
But it's something that I'm quite wary of, and I hope that there's not a reset button with PvE2, but a kind of back to strong basics in a lot of regards. We'll see though.
A bit of a refocus, right? Like culling a lot of like the stuff that has accumulated that you realize, okay, maybe we don't actually need that, and focusing on the stuff that has worked. That's kind of like what I'm hoping in some of the systems, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's that's it. It's a lot of once again, a lot of speculation, a lot of stuff that we've been seeing coming through so far. As I was talking about, like Smart Loot and everything like that, they're potentially experimenting with, and we've talked briefly about harvest nerfs and how much people feel like that's gonna, change the environment of the game and all this kind of stuff. And, we don't know what's coming in 3.14 next. In a game like Path of Exile, there's so much balancing that goes on. And that's where I wanted to very awkwardly segue to of our next topic.
That was nearly smooth. That was nearly good.
I wanted to fuck it up at the end there, so I did. No, but game balance, right? This is what we very quickly mentioned on a while ago. Was I think Yoji and I just had an offhand comment about games feeling either needing to or feeling the need to heavily nerf or buff certain things in their games to keep them intriguing to the majority of the player base, to keep the game evolving, to keep the meta fresh, all this kind of stuff. And Path of Exile is one of those games that constantly updates. You've got a ton of others. You've got like League of Legends, Warframe. I don't know. There's so many out there. I'm not going to go on a massive list, but it's very much a games as a service type of experience where maybe your favorite thing is going to get nerfed and something else is going to get buffed. But the first question we have here is, why do you guys think that is important? Or do you think that's important in a video game like this? Buffs, like pretty heavy buffs and nerfs to things.
Go on, Yoji.
So I think a lot of people would say yes. I'm kind of like taking the opposite approach because I'm not 100% like where I stand on this whole issue. But I know that there are games that haven't been changed for like many years and that still have active communities that play, for example, PvP, PvE, and there's still stuff discovered, right? But that's obviously always very small communities. For example, there are old games that still have speedrunning communities, but those are like so dedicated people that it obviously doesn't apply to your average player. But there's also, for example, people still playing Dark Souls 1 PvP and still discovering new strats like 10 years later. That does still happen. So I think to like a certain degree, I think a lot of games changed way faster than players have a chance to actually explore stuff. That's like a lot of the time what I see. Where something like pops up as like the new dominant strategy and they immediately whack it down with the nerf hammer, and you're like, maybe give them like a month or 5 to explore and see if they can find a counter strategy before you go in with the nuclear option. And other times I think some games would probably get stale if they'd like just never change. Like, there are probably games where you play them and you at some point you're like, hey, I think I experienced everything, and then move to the next one. But if they change, you come back, kind of like PoE.
See, the thing I was going to completely disagree. I was going to agree, but say that's not relevant to PoE. And then I'm like, no, that's exactly relevant to PoE, because this is the biggest issue I have with every single league. So my favorite leagues are the really punishing ones. So like Launch Delirium, Launch Syndicate. And there's always this massive thing with PoE where it's like really new and scary comes out. And people are like, this is ridiculous. It has to be changed. But then people start to realize, oh, if I do this, it's not that bad. And then as soon as like some of the players start to learn how to do it, GGG's like, and we nerfed it by 90%. And it's like, okay. So the people who like worked out whatever the new OP thing was that league, or worked out the new trick, it's like, well, their build now trivializes it. And the people who didn't want to update anything about their build, well, now their build can do the mechanic, which is good, but also screw you because you made my game shit. Like Launch Delirium was so much fun. I loved Launch Delirium. Like it had the visual clarity issues. Like that stuff was definitely stuff that had to be like sorted. But in terms of balance, I actually found it really enjoyable. And it was the same thing with like Synthesis. It's like when you get an intervention, not Synthesis, sorry, a Syndicate. If you get an intervention Syndicate now, it's very rare that you're frightened. You're kind of like, oh, it's these guys. Whereas when it first came out, you're like, oh, it's these guys, like, oh. And they just, like, they nerfed it to the point of, like, no longer being a mechanic, and it's like...
I wish I experienced the first patch Betrayal, because I took a big break from Delve and Betrayal, from Path of Exile. I didn't actually play those leagues at all, so I'm still catching up on the mechanics of both of those leagues, but, yeah, I heard it was pretty insane.
It was scary when Hacky comes in with the overhead slam and just like deletes you. It's like, oh. But to backtrack a little bit to something you're saying, because I do think it is a case of, and I think it was Tai Kill who said this recently. A lot of the times, the term meta is nebulous because it depends on what you're trying to do. Like, there's a different meta for every different thing. Like, there's a very different meta between, for example, a hardcore SSF race and then like a softcore trade league thing. And I feel like a lot of the discussion around like what's the meta or what's dominant in PvE gets kind of twisted by the majority of the streamers are hardcore SSF racers. And then at the same time, they'll be compared to someone like MP, who's in a fully min-max group in trade league with like multiple mirrors per gear slot. And it's this whole like 1% thing. And it's like, wait, hang on. Rise, who spent like the last 50 hours not even getting Uberlab, is on the same level as this dude with like a group of 5 people with headhunters. So wait, this doesn't make sense to me. So there's this whole kind of thing of like, well, what is it that you're trying to do? Like, are you trying to like speed rush pick the boss? They're trying to do a different thing. And I do think that there's a very clear distinction between a game which is a dead game but has an active community, and then a game which is getting massive updates every 3 months. Because if PoE didn't touch the balance but every 3 months added new stuff, the game would be in an awful state, because you'd be like, please just change the skill. Like, no, we don't do that, you'll work it out yourself.
It's League 855 of I don't know, EK. Whatever, Blade Blast.
And well, the other thing there as well, in terms of, you know, those two comparisons between games that don't get updates, and, you know, consistently people find new things or find new metas or new strategies, and a game like Path of Exile, the obvious differences that you can usually see, you know, there are obvious caveats, but you can usually see a game like Path of Exile that has constant updates and constant meta shifts, it does just grow, if it's being successful. You know, you can have old games that have resurgences and get like a bunch of people through in the community for one reason or another, but it's not that kind of consistent growth that you do experience from this kind of planned out, meticulous, well, whether you think it's, you know, meticulous or not, the balancing that does happen in games. But yeah, that's where I kind of see that as well, in terms of balance in this regard, is very much... It's in place to kind of keep consistent growth in the game. Was where I see Path of Exile, at least, you know, their balances are to promote growth in the game, promote new play styles and people kind of coming back and trying new things. Oh, that skill, I haven't played that for ages and that just got a buff. I'm going to boot up this league, you know. I mean, those sorts of things.
Oh, sorry, go.
No, yeah, I was done. Go.
There's also the whole thing that, and this is something which is still... Like, it's not that new, but it still is new in gaming. The fact that so much of what is considered strong or weak is content creator led.
Yeah.
There are things which are
Huge.
actually not that great, but because they're like a comfortable playstyle for like one or two, like how Alk will always play like the same kinds of builds over and over and over again. It doesn't matter like if Cyclone is the best skill or the worst skill, he'll be like playing a Cyclone character. There's something I've kind of noticed where like there aren't that many people who make trap builds. It's kind of like me and Octavian. So if you go on like PU Ninja look for trap things, a lot of like our habits will be in like the trees, and like there are some things that I know that aren't optimal, but I build my characters that way because that's how I like to do my characters. And then I'll randomly look at PU Ninja and like the top level 100 traps up. Oh, that's my tree from like 4 leagues ago, which is actually now a bad tree. This is what the new one should be. And like there's lots of weird things like that. Like if someone like Mathil, for example, was to make a build guide on a character that he found really fun to play, which actually numerically wasn't that great, but he had a lot of fun with it, then people would play it. It's the same thing with like how Enki had this constant back and forth with his Arc guide. He had this really well-written guide when Arc was for a long time really not that great. Yeah. And then it's like, well, why is there such a popular guide if it's numerically not very strong? And then it just like depends on what patch is, if it's good or if it's bad and whatever. So it's, you know, there's that whole aspect to it as well, which is interesting from a design point of view.
Yeah, that's it's very true, and it is that elusive word meta. Like we all talk about the meta, but what are we even referencing when we do talk about that? There needs to be, I don't know. We need to be more specific about that. Everyone does. I always say, the meta's so weird, you know, all this kind of stuff, but I'm just like, what am I even referencing?
It's also like it's one of those things of to like double down on that whole thing. You can have a build which is a good build because it's cheap, but then if every streamer is then playing that build in a trade league, well then that is no longer a cheap build. So then when that is no longer a cheap build, it isn't actually that good because you could achieve way more with a different build with way and there's that whole thing of it as well. Yeah. So it's kind of like in what context is this good or what context is this bad?
That's like when you have a build that you can, for example, in trade, you can start very specific, unique, requiring builds without a problem as long as it's not one of the like super expensive ones, right? Like when for example, I had a Mjolnir league start, and I was like, you can't league start Mjolnir, that's insane. I'm like, that thing's like 1 or 2K, so unless Mathil is league starting Mjolnir besides me, no one's gonna care, and I'm gonna buy a Mjolnir on day 1 for 2K, and it's cool, totally cool. That's basically that effect. And but that's something that's really hard. Like if you're someone who just follows a guide or just follows what a streamer does, you can really fall into that trap where you're like, this build is super cheap. I'm gonna try that. Wait, why is all the Gippies like 50C plus? Yeah, because it's popular. That's kind of like how it works. And I think often the word meta means like what is considered powerful and what is popular. That's basically like the rough thing. Like I think that's like kind of like I think I agree with you that it's kind of like a diffuse word that's just like there somewhere. But I think most people have like a rough idea of what it means. If you say the meta of the PoE builds, everyone like looks at a roughly the same direction at least. So
roughly,
I think it's not
definitely
something necromancer, something.
Yeah. No one's going to be looking at Glacial Hammer. No one's going to be thinking about Glacial Hammer when they think about the meta.
Which is wrong, by the way. But
there was a lot of people about halfway through the league that were talking about this guy on PoE Ninja that had like 1 billion Glacial Hammer DPS on the sheet or something. And that became this weird talked about meta for like 3 days. I don't know. Did anyone else hear about that? I heard it everywhere.
That's another thing which is kind of annoys me, and people are like, melee's... Okay, so just briefly to go on a tangent on this. I had this guy tweeting at me like a year ago about how like melee's shit in PoE. No one's ever won a race with melee. Melee, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, Steel. Like I'm naming all these people in races. Like, yeah, like they'll never win a 100 race with melee. Melee's terrible. And then literally
have done that.
Steel won the 100 with Lacerate, and I'm like, and he's like, Lacerate's not melee. I'm like, there's all this rubbish, you know. And then it's the same people come back and they'll be like, well, Cyclone's not melee, and Lacerate's not melee, and Heavy Strike's not melee. And then if you take like any min-maxed melee character, you can change the skill. Like, you could be like Heavy Strike, Glacial Hammer. They'll still like destroy everything.
I mean, you'll have this exploding chest anyway, and at that point, every skill feels the same, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm sitting here thinking and that sort of thing. Is there any games that you guys can think of that have tried a kind of update and meta shift cycle like Path of Exile that's just done really poorly? I'm just trying to think here. I'm sure there is.
There's the whole Marvel Heroes thing, right?
I mean,
I didn't know much about Marvel Heroes.
But they shifted like design direction more than the meta.
Basic TLDR with that game, because that actually there's a few really interesting videos going for like if you go do Death of a Game Marvel Heroes, that had like a really sordid past. There's like lots of weird stuff which happened in this development. But they basically had this thing where like their meta was crazy out of control with stupid AoE and speed. The devs nerfed it to hell all in one big patch. Everyone was like, screw that, and they all left the game. And then with the other issues, the game just kind of ended up dying. I think one of the things which is interesting about PoE from a balance buff nerf perspective is that aside from the whole cluster jewel debacle, they will never do balance changes outside of the 3-month league cycle. So it's one of those things where you can have something which is very obviously a problem, either like problem strong or problem weak. But because of the timeline, it's like, well, if it doesn't get addressed on this next patch, that's not going to be the dominant strategy for half a year or longer. And when you stretch things out over that period, it becomes a real issue. And then when you have a case of... so recently we had the big Ascendancy rework, and a bunch of the SAB changes were actually changes that happened because I wrote a Google Doc, because I knew the pre-SAB stuff, and I'm like, this will be bad for blah, blah, blah. It was like a real, like, oh, traps, woe is me, oh, the death of a... You know, but, like, I wrote up this thing, and, like, there were some valid points, they agreed with me, and ended up changing some of the things on it. But, like, one of the things that I had in my, like, thing that I wrote up is, like, I understand it's not finite, but the thing is, like, if this rework doesn't land... It's not like you're going to touch this again next patch, because you're not going to be wanting to mess around with sentences until the next biggest sentence works. So it's like, if this doesn't land now, what, is it going to be like another 2 years until you guys touch your sentences?
Yeah.
And like, that's the thing where like PoE balance can get kind of scary, when it's one of those things of, well, we've just done a massive like melee rework, so we'll revisit melee again, but like we want to do something else next, so we want to do something else next. And that's where like PoE can be kind of weird. Where if it doesn't land on that first one, it could be, you know, a year, 2 years until that's next like chance to be decent.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, I was very scared when they announced they were gonna rework melee. As a melee player, I was very scared because, I mean, if it goes well, I was like excited, of course, as well. But I knew if this goes poorly, what am I gonna play for the next year or two? Because they can't revisit the same stuff over and over. They'll do like a minion rework, and then they usually won't touch minions for at least like a year or two. At least, like minimum, sometimes even longer.
Because so much of PoE's marketing now is tied up in the fact that they have this thing of like, this patch will be this focus. Because if you go back to like old school PoE, they had a thing back in beta of like a new skill gem every week. That was something they were trying to land. And that went on for quite a surprisingly long time. And then eventually they stopped doing it because they were like, this is a terrible idea. Because we'll either just like run out of ideas, rush everything, or just put loads of like bad skills in for bloat. So now that they have this very targeted, like, this will be the cold dot patch, or this will be that patch, it means that it's much harder to do the wide sweeping general stuff. And you're much more likely to be, I can't remember his name, it begins with a H. I actually met him at Exocon, really nice guy, but he was in charge of the whole like mana rework, because he played a lot of Diablo modded stuff and really loved those whole mana builds, and he was like, I want to do Archmage, I want to do this, I want to do that. And that was just kind of like his brainchild, and he made this really cool thing.
And it's like, really cool.
That's
really awesome. One of my
my
favorite recent archetypes that was introduced is definitely the Archmage mana archetype. That like the whole feel, the concept is so well done, and it interacts with a lot of things. I don't think we have a lot of archetypes that really interact with other archetypes well, and I think the mana one is one of the best ones at that, even though it's like super prohibited. It's like, doesn't work with totems, doesn't work with this, doesn't work with that. It actually reads like it shouldn't branch out too much, but it still does, which is cool.
But yeah, so like when you have that kind of like a marketing strategy where you're like, this is going to be the mana patch, if there's just some one random dude on the team like, actually we should probably nerf this one skill because it's a bit weak, it's like, I mean, if it's just that it'll like change one line of code, sure, but we're not going to let you like sit and spend all this time reworking this one thing. Although saying that, it wasn't actually, I can't remember which league it was, but it wasn't that long ago that they did the kind of like free-for-all league with no real focus, so they're just doing random abilities. I can't remember which one that was. We had one of the devs on, and we're saying like, was it liberating having the stun focus? Like, yeah, it was kind of fun, but
wasn't the one where they did the animated weapon stuff for Blade Fall, Blade
Yeah,
Blast?
I think that was blades and like some other random stuff.
Yeah, that was when they were like, okay, yeah, like everyone was able to like pick out like something they think needs work or they wanted to work at, like a bit of a design jam type of thing. That's I don't know who was that who mentioned it. Was it like Jonathan, I think, or Chris?
I think it might have been.
But but I remember that. I think that was the animated weapon patch because I mean that's like one of these interconnected changes that you can only make then. Because if it's like a minion patch, but then you wouldn't touch EK and Blade Vortex and like freaking invent Blade Blast out of nowhere on top of like all that. Like these are the intertwined things that kind of get lost when you focus on one thing. I think that's kind of like the downside of that focused approach.
And it's also one of those things of you need to balance with the scope of the game in mind. Because much of Path of Exile is just stupidly complex. Like it's way too complex. Like if your job is like, oh, fix this one thing, and it's like, okay, well, what are we doing next week? How does this what's happening next week? How does this interact with the thing that we're planning for PvE2, which the players won't get for like 2 years, but we want this to not be broken for that? And like when you have to factor in all those other things, I can't remember. So basically, like, to give you an example, and this has been fact checked because I was like, how accurate is this? And they're like, yeah, that's pretty accurate. So like, okay, you've got 5 different like mini groups, right? And it's like, okay, you've all got your little pet project, and they're all working on something which is like, it's vaguely related. Group 1 finishes first, and they go to like whoever the main dude is. I know, let's say Jonathan. Jonathan, what do you think of this? And he's like, pretty good. Change this, and this. They go, okay, so they go back to that. Meanwhile, Group 2 is still working on their thing, and they're like, okay, I think we're good. And they go like, Jonathan, what do you think? He's like, change this, and this. Oh, by the way, Group 1 changed what they're doing, so you might want to update yours to what they're doing. Okay, cool. Then, like, Meanwhile, you've got Group 5, who like, this is going to be great. And then, like, wait, everything else is different now? So now what we've just made doesn't... Oh, okay.
Doesn't...
Or, like...
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yep.
Oh, no.
Like, can you imagine with, like, the Blade rework thing? Like, for example, like, we're going to do this whole Blade rework thing. But then, for whatever reason, because of tech issues, Blade Blast doesn't work. Well, then what do you do? Do you then delay the Blade rework to the next patch? Or do you ship the Blade rework without the main defining feature? And I feel like there's lots of little things like that which happen in the background, which, with that in mind, a lot of the wonky balance stuff, or the things which seem obvious that don't happen, make a lot more sense. Because like a lot of stuff happens with people where like, I'll read it, I'm like, what were they thinking? Like, why would they do that? Is stupid. And then like 2 leagues later, I'd be like, that's why they did that. Okay, that makes sense now.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it would help if they just like had like a little star that
like
they put on things, and just like, and then at the bottom it's like, this will make sense in a patch or 3. I think that would already help people not go like completely mental on like some stupid change where like, doesn't make sense. Why would you do this? And they're like, yeah. The Molten Strike nerfs, the 15 in a row, like collateral, finally makes sense because they were. Like,
I'm still waiting for that one to make sense. I'm still waiting for that one.
I'm also still waiting for that one, but maybe in some Molten Strike will change everything.
Break the meta.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. It's, I don't know. I've always had this question about how much do you think, or how much do I think, game developers... Well, let's just take Path of Exile for this case. How much I think Path of Exile is deliberately, like, heavily nerfing things, or know how much they're nerfing things before we do, or buffing things before we do for, balance of the game. On the flip side, right? Let's say that Thanos was creating a game like this, and he wanted everything balanced absolutely perfectly. How would that look? Now, we're not going to, like, I don't want to talk about specifics of, like, oh, you can't balance everything perfectly, because that is almost impossible. In an idyllic world,
right?
A game going forward with updates, what do you think is the better option? Like, actually having big differences between the best and the worst, and making sure you balance those, kind of this unequal balance, this seesaw, or just having things extremely equal, like... Those are kind of 2 opposite ends, because we look at a game and we're like, man, I really want this to be more balanced as a player. But as a developer, do you think that's what they want? You know, I don't know. There's a lot of questions there for me.
It depends entirely as a play. Like, I've been playing SSF for the last couple of years, and I don't really care what the meta is. Like, I play... People was like, Tarke, you just play Corsica every league. It's like, I'll play it if it's good, and I'll play it if it's bad. You know, it just so happens to keep getting better and better every patch, so I'm more justified in my thing. But it's like, I used to be, like, only a bow crit player for a long time when bows were considered really bad. But at the time, it's like actually play, because a lot of what is considered bad in PoE is actually very much viable.
Yeah.
So like, it depends. But like, I am saying that from the point of view of someone who only plays SSF or private leagues, and I'll just kind of like, I've played the game for 7+ years. I've got something super like 10 to 15,000 hours. I can pretty much make anything work within reason. Compare that to someone like Rise, who's like, I really want to play something which isn't Essence Rain Contagion. Can we please not make Essence Rain Contagion the best build every league? And then compare that to some random dude who's like, I just want to kill Cirrus, you know? So it really depends on like what your goal is as a player and then as a developer. Obviously, with what they have at the moment, it's very easy to make players excited because they're like, minion patch. And then people are like, oh, I've never played minions before. And it can be a really good way to introduce players into new play styles, because you might have someone who, if everything's perfectly balanced and they're like me and it's like, well, their favorite skill is Corsica, maybe they'll never play anything but Corsica. But suddenly if this new thing which is really strong, they're like, well, I want to try that, and they might be like, oh, actually I really like this play style. So if that gets nerfed next league, they'll still play it because they actually really like that build. And by playing different things, you learn more about the game, you become a more established player, then your knowledge grows. It's like, I'm quite comfortable only playing like the same 1 or 2 types of builds now, because I've played every build over the last, 7 years. Whereas if I'd only played for like 2 leagues in a row, and I was just playing the one build, I'd actually have very little PoE knowledge, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
You want to be promoting your players to be like branching out, because they're less likely to get bored, they're more likely to learn, and like the more you can get players invest in systems, the more excited they're going to be when a random unique gets revealed, because they'll be like, oh, that unique could be good with that build. They can see it outside of the scope of like that one archetype or whatever.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, that's something I always say when people are like, how do we learn the game? Do I learn what items are valuable, all that type of stuff? And yeah, you will recognize what items are good and what works if you played the build before. Like, if you've played Explosive Arrow before, you will recognize a good Explosive Arrow amulet or whatever, because you know that. But if you've never played a minion build, you won't recognize a good minion, I don't know, glove, whatever, stuff like that. Yeah, I think that's some pretty good points. But I do think, actually, like, let's say we have a game that's like actually perfectly balanced. I think that kind of takes away 2 things that are cool about games. One is trying to find the OP stuff. I think that's something that's really fun in PoE, and a lot of people love that, where you're like, I want to find out what's the best thing. If there's no best thing, that completely doesn't exist anymore. Like, if all skills scale to the exact same clear speed, damage, threshold, boss killing, defensive, everything is always roughly the same for every skill. I mean, yes, it would be nice because you could choose the skills you like by playstyle. I think that's a positive thing. So that's a point towards having at least some sort of balance. While at the same time, like, if every skill just scales to X value, then yeah, why try something else, as you said. That's kind of like what it comes down to. And I think the other thing is also, some people enjoy trying to make the bad stuff work and making like a build and be like, yo, look at this, I actually make Glacial Hammer work. Look at this, I'm killing Cirrus, I'm clearing maps in decent time with a skill that no one like thought would be viable. I think a lot of people love tinkering and optimizing bad builds, or like off-meta skills, or maybe even like actual skills that are actually weaker. I mean, there are skills that are pretty weak compared to some of the really strong skills. Like, the gap from like the weakest skill to the strongest skill in PoE is pretty wide. And it kind of like just vanishes as you go. Like, if you have like super crazy experience and knowledge in the game and infinite budget, then yeah, everything kind of like blurs together at some point, and it just comes down to what skill mechanically covers the most AoE or whatever. So yeah, I'd say at that point, those things are definitely something I would miss in PoE, and both sides, if the game was like Thanos'd out.
Yeah, well, I've got a question, I guess, for you, EOG, because I still play the game too much. Well, not too much. I enjoy the game, right? And so I can get to those points, and I can make those choices where I'm like, yeah, I might spend a little bit longer on this build. I know you've been playing a bit more as well, but in times where you haven't had a lot of time to play, have you ever felt, I can't really approach that skill because it's going to take a little too much time to get where I want to get to in this time or anything like that? Like, do you think that's, you know, an adequate way of thinking and how people would think in the more kind of casual gamer aspect of, hey, I want to play that skill, but I'm just not going to because it's not strong, or I don't think it's strong, or I don't know how to build it, or it's not in the meta, so there's not builds out, you know, like, yeah. Have you felt that way?
That's like my main consideration when picking a starter build, because usually I take my first or second build of a league and I take that like basically till the end. I don't really play more than 1 or 2 builds. I usually focus on one build that I really like max out and make like one big build guide video at the end for how I like manage to like map it out. And that's like my main consideration. I currently, like right before the podcast, I did a stream where I decided I want to play a strike skill for next league, and I basically immediately I decided it can't really be an SSF, because getting that to a level with my playtime that I feel good about, like making it like clear fast enough, with my playtime would be kind of on the edge to actually make it good enough. Especially if I don't want to take one of the good ones and I want to take one of the more wonky ones, then the single target either wouldn't feel good enough, or the clear wouldn't feel good enough.
I'm actually quite surprised by that.
But yeah, I mean, I play like this league. I looked at my like play time overall, and that's including a lot of AFK time because baby cries, cat is destroying something. But I had like 2 hours per day, roughly 2.5 ish. That's like if I take my played divided by days of league, that's like what I had.
But like if you're playing from like start to end, that's still a lot. That's like 180 hours.
Yeah. I mean that is quite a lot. I had like 5 to 6 days on track when I looked at that, and I played till like last week basically. I played all that. I level 99. I mean, that is probably further than almost anyone ever gets. I mean, that's further than I've got before this league.
Yeah.
I play the game so much, and I have not got past 96. So
Yep.
it's just
not. If you're playing
like
my thing. 1k life, look how much damage I've got.
Oh, of course,
look, I've got 500 million paths of building. Ooh. Could I drop one of these for a life node? No.
No.
I mean, I play
silly.
like SSF hardcore viable builds in SSF softcore. That's like I didn't die at all from 98 to 99.
Yeah,
I think I died once, and I didn't die at all from 97 to 98. So yeah, it was a tanky build.
To bounce off that, I haven't had that problem the way you presented it, but I have had the problem of I really want to play build B, but build A mechanically does the exact same thing but so much better. Why would I ever like that's more of like an efficiency thing, and I feel like that caters to like the more like min-maxy type of players. Like for a long time, the idea of ever playing Detonate Dead when Volatile Dead exists would be like, why would you do that? Like there's been a lot of things where like because the game has shifted, there are now a lot more skills that are more viable because it's not everything's all about clear. But for the longest time, it's like, why would anyone play Detonate Dead? I used to play a lot of Detonate Dead, and people go and stream like, why are you playing this? This is terrible. You should be playing Volatile Dead.
That's good damage.
Right? And it's like, and that's one of those things where like, again, it goes back to like, it depends what it is you're trying to do, and it depends on what the game is at and what the direction of the game is. There are a lot of skills which you don't actually need to change anything about the skills themselves. But if you suddenly introduce a boss meta, that will change everything else. Yes. Or suddenly, if you introduce a meta of like, oh, here are all these new influence mods which interact with a certain like fire dot skills are a really good example. Like when Hunter stuff came out, they suddenly became way more powerful because they had all this scaling, and you would like never play Fire Ignite when you could be playing like Chaos Dot. And there's so much side stuff that you really need to take into account. But I've definitely had the case of why would I play B when A does everything but better, you know?
Yeah, it's very true. You're reminding me of my mishap at the start of this league with Firestorm Ignite.
I don't know what you're talking about.
No idea. Yeah. No, but it was the same concept. Even after everything that happens, I was then looking at the build and I was like, I kind of still just want to play Firestorm Ignite just to see how it goes. And then I socket Fireball in, and it's just 4 times the damage. Everything's exactly the same, and it's 4 times the damage. And I'm like, all right.
What a viewer actually came into my chat and was like, yo, I have an idea. Firestorm Archmage, dude. And I'm like, Well, I'm playing an Archmage build right now. Let me just like try it out. Like I swap in Firestorm, level up the gem a bit. The gem level doesn't even matter as much for Archmage. I have like freaking 7-8k mana. Should be like the damage should be somewhat there at least. Even in like white to yellow maps, and the build was doing tier 16 delirious stuff, like 80% at that time. No, just didn't not even at all. Like the AoE coverage is so horrible with like the tiny pew. They just don't cover much. You basically have to rely on the big meteor most of the time, and yeah, the damage still wasn't there. Like overall, just not.
It's it's pitiful. You know?
I think they've been like very careful with it. Like,
and that's part of the problem that Path of Exile has, is because there are so many skills. Like there are very few games which just have the number of skill gems that we do. Because it could be one of those things of like, if you were to make PV from scratch, it would be very easy to be like, okay, this will be the lightning single target skill. This will be the lightning clear skill. This will be the lightning clear skill, but it's the channel. And then it's like, okay, those are 3 distinct playstyles. But there are a lot of skills which just do the same thing in PoE.
Yeah.
So when you have like 4 skills that play the same, well, you just pick them with the best coverage.
Yeah.
So unless it's a case of like, well, it has worse coverage, but it has like 3 times the damage.
Yeah. But if they have the mechanics, then you usually end up using one for single target. Like, for example, Pestilence Strike with Viper Strike would be an example. You just, like, slot in the other gem, kill the boss in, like, a third of the time. Woo, cool. Yeah. But you never use Viper Strike for clear. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I guess, like, if I can talk about, well, last Epoch, because a lot of Path of Exile content creators have been playing that as well, myself included. And, you know, the way that... Obviously, it's a very early game. It's still in early access, but the way that their skill system works is their skill gems, in quotation marks, are the skill trees themselves. You have a skill for an archetype, and you level up that skill, and all of the kind of interactions with that skill are confined to its own skill tree within that. It's like, you know, equipping support gems that only that skill can equip, I guess, which is a much more condensed way of balancing that. And I think that, you know, going forward, they can introduce a lot more skills. It takes more time, development time, to put those skills in, because you've got to develop that whole tree, I would guess. But, you know, you can kind of condense it more. Path of Exile has the opposite end of it, where you've got a skill gem that will already interact with all these other support gems when you put it in the game. But, you know, the downside of that is it does interact with every other support gem, and then it kind of feels like just adding to the herd, unless it's got a very kind of unique mechanic to it, which we do see a lot of skills in Path of Exile coming through. Most of the new skills coming through have been really great, and very, very unique. But when will it get to a point, again, that kind of bloat in Path of Exile of when will it just be one more fireball added to the game? Or I'm sure that's not going to happen, but...
I mean, we have like, I think we have really seen the past few skills they've added have mostly been like very unique ones. I think like Hydrosphere, for example, is like very unique skill that feels super different from everything else that we've had in the game before. That was not just I don't know, like a new Ice Nova Vortex, I don't know, Frostbolt, whatever. It was a very distinct, unique skill. Like the conversion element was that you can actually hit it, which created a bunch of other problems to like basically underline your point. It interacts with so many things that probably weren't foreseen. Or maybe they were, and they just wanted to give those skills something to play with. So I think the skill design recently has been really good. Also, all the support skills that we have gotten. It's a fantastic skill. Trinity is a really good support gem. Also, it's like very pleasing visual. I love the little icon thing. It looks way better than the normal buff icons we have. So,
I think that a lot of the comparisons between Last Epoch and PoE I find quite funny. So I think Last Epoch's a really good game. I played a lot of its early, like, alpha. I can't remember if it was alpha, but I played it like a long time ago. I did like a review.
It was really wonky, basically.
Yeah. And it was quite cool. I had a few of the devs be like, "Oh, we really liked your review, so that was cool." And I've like tried putting a little bit of time into it recently. For the longest time, I was waiting for the Rogue class to come out, and then I dabbled recently. But it's kind of like comparing World of Warcraft to like a random MMO that's still in like early access. Because the thing with PoE is like it's been out for 7 years. It's collected all of this baggage and all this detritus, but then it has all of this content. And then you have Lost Epoch, which is just kind of come along, and it's like, okay, What did Grim Dawn do that we liked? What did Diablo do that we liked? What did Path of Exile do we like? And they've kind of refined it all, but then it's very much this own thing, and it's like I find it funny, especially when it comes to like the trade thing, because everyone's angry with PoE trades. Like Last Epoch is the best trading system ever made, but then Last Epoch doesn't. Sorry, not trade.
You mean crafting?
Last Epoch. Last Epoch has the best crafting system ever, but it doesn't even have trade. And then it's like you don't know how that's going to be when trade gets added
exactly.
in.
Yeah. That's what I keep saying to people. Like, let's just wait till trade. All right.
Yeah, like I think Last Epoch is a really cool game, and I've chatted a lot with their developers. And
I'm really curious how they will deal with the trade implementation, like how they will deal with how that affects the item system, and if they have something planned, something in mind, if things shift too much from where they want it to be. Because currently they're like in easy mode when it comes to balance, which is SSF.
Yes.
And once trade comes up, then I'm very, very curious. I think they might have like some cool ideas, because they have had a lot of cool ideas for the system that they currently have in place. Kind of like PoE had back in the day, where they had a lot of new and different approaches to things that we haven't seen before. I think, which is why Last Epoch reminds me a lot of like PoE back in the day, kind of like when PoE came into the scene, and
definitely.
Last Epoch came in a similar manner, like very rough around the edges, very unfinished, but you can see the potential, and you can see all the really cool ideas and the passion for the RPG genre in the design already.
But like that's also the point I want to stress is like that's also part of the problem, is that because it is so unfinished, it has emotional baggage, because the players will make it what they want it to be in their head. Because they can see the potential. It's like when you can see the potential of something which isn't that well defined, you automatically fill in all the gaps. Whereas like people, like there's this whole thing with PoE2. I get angry when people say that PoE is everything, but like a lot of people are so exhausted with PoE now. Like any hope and wonder and excitement they had is gone. They're like, dead game. All the developers hate us. This is awful. But they go, Last Epoch, new, exciting. These are the bastions of the RPG genre. But like it's one of those things, like with Path of Exile, there definitely is skill bloat. And we talked about this earlier about like base plate, we'd want them to cut back some of the bases. Would we actually want like PoE to be like, you know what, we'll cut 30% of the skill gems?
That's actually a difficult thing to do.
Because
I don't think
the game might be better if they did that. But for example, I play a lot of traps. If they were like, you know, traps have just never worked, they've never landed, no one on the team really has a passion for it, we're just going to delete them. I'd be pissed. I'd be like, why did you just keep it in there? You know what I mean?
I mean, they deleted old mines basically for remote traps. I was kind of annoyed at that, because I actually like the place at your feet mines. I like them.
Same.
I was kind of about it. I think there are actually a few skills, if you remove them, maybe like 3 people would be annoyed. I think there are a few skills that you could delete.
Yeah.
No one would bat an eye.
Give me 3 skills that you think could be safe to remove from PoE.
Safe in the sense there will be people annoyed. Like, for example, Heavy Strike would be on my list too. Like, you could remove that, and I don't think people would be annoyed. Or you could make Ice Crash a Threshold Jewel for Glacial Hammer, the AoE variant. You can cull and put stuff together like that.
The sort of thing you could get away with by like, putting it in something else. But Heavy Strike, I think Heavy Strike's iconic, and I think that like
it is iconic.
That's true.
Like, you can't get rid of Heavy Strike. It's the first.
It's not going to be us that's annoyed. It'll be Chris.
Which is like the first class. You can't get rid of that, dude.
Yeah. It'll be Chris, yeah.
Conversion Trap, I don't think anyone would mind.
You could get rid of Conversion Trap.
Yeah. Someone said Frost Wall, but then what are Endless Delvers going to do? What are they going to say?
Frost Wall actually has a lot of uses,
It does.
Frost Wall actually has a surprising amount of uses.
Frost Wall has a niche that no other skill, like there's no overlap. So like, that's actually like, that isn't what you'd want to remove. You'd want to try and remove skills which had this like overlap, where it's like there are 8 skills that do the exact same thing.
I think actually, like looking at the strike skills recently, Dual Strike has kind of like lost its identity in a lot of ways. They kind of like tacked so much in there. I don't think the skill itself knows where it wants to be anymore.
I feel like Dual and Double Strike could just be one skill that changes based on what weapon you have equipped. Like,
yes, yeah.
I mean, Dual Strike already has the like the Threshold Jewel that changes based on weapon type, which made it actually way worse, because now you have to use maces for the build and melee splash, which is so bad. Also, only good thing about Dual Strike was always like, okay, at least I get build and melee splash. Well, not anymore, unless I want to use physical maces or full conversion maces, which is super hard to like pull off in, for example, SSF, but also in general. Yeah, I think there are a few skills that you can like condense, maybe with a Threshold Jewel system, and expand that system. I think that system is still far away, like a bit of a tangent maybe, but very, very far away from what it could have been. I think when they introduced it, I saw a lot of potential in that system when they introduced it, and that like absolutely never got realized at all.
I mean, a lot of people may not know this, but like Yoji was on the original Bay class lineup, and on our early Bay class, we would talk about threshold jewels. Like, it's been a thing for a while. Like, threshold jewels have just never really had their full potential.
I was so excited for that. Like, I still think it could be so much more than like most of the time. What they do now, it's like they mostly add like a support gem or.
Yeah.
Is there anything more? No, not. I mean, sometimes they add like a support gem-like feature that is not much more than a support gem, like the hinder thing for blight, for example.
There was the discharge thing recently with the cooldown.
That's kind of
most recent threshold jewel as well, wasn't it?
The fireball one got changed as well, right? To no longer igniting, but scorching.
Yeah.
But so that's also kind of like a support gem / like I could see that being a support gem, like ignite chance, scorch chance, bam, done, support gem. I would like see stuff like converted basically to different skill. I think that's how you could condense the skills. Like Glacial Hammer, bam, AoE Threshold Jewel. Oh, now I got not like a bit of splash. No, now I got freaking Ice Crash. Stuff like that, maybe.
Yeah. No, I can see that. Like, I think Threshold Jewels would be... That's really interesting. I haven't even thought about that, Yoji. You know, mushing two skills together and just changing them with Threshold Jewels a bit more.
I always like good, when they introduced Wild Strike. I just like I looked at it and I was like, they should have just made that the melee version of Elemental Hit and be done. Because no one uses, or basically no one used back in the day, especially melee ally hit. I mean, currently it's actually like see some use here and there. Because it's like if you're making a really mean build and you need like a skill that's easy to scale, that's basically what you use. See Badger's Transcendence build.
I do want to say, yes, I did use melee elemental hit, but it was shit. It was terrible.
But it would have been more shit if you needed to like use the skill that actually needed proper damage scaling.
Yeah, true. I did build around it. It was still bad. I built around it and it was bad. But yeah, no, I get your point. Yeah.
But yeah, I think like there are like a few things of that. But they haven't, as I said, the skill design recently has been way better in the sense that they haven't had a skill come out where I was like, that doesn't make sense to put that in the game right now. I think the last one where I was like a bit confused was Pestilence Strike, as I mentioned, where I was like, that's not that mechanically different. Like the effect is cool, but like the whole splash thing. But they could have just made that like a second threshold jewel for Viper Strike and be like, this is a single target jewel, this is the spread AoE Prolift jewel. Swap it out for bosses. Yay, clear. Poo, PogChamp, Viper Strike viable. Basically new playstyle. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also one of those things of like, for example, Split Arrow. Does Split Arrow really need to exist as a gem in a game with like GMP? It's like Arrow Nova is a support gem now, but like if Arrow Nova didn't exist, there would have been Arrow Nova as a skill. Like there are some skills which maybe could have just been support gems, but like that's the thing of like, that's a decision that you would make now, but you wouldn't have made 7 years ago. Yeah, with the limitations and everything. Can I say, I was talking to one of the programmers. This is just a really fun thing to do if you ever just like want to get your rocks off a bit. Find one of the GGG programmers on Twitter and just ask them how the gem transfer system is going, and they'll just start crying because they've got to do this whole thing of changing the gems from PV2 to stand and everything. But he was like.
Also, whenever you think about, like, whenever I think about the whole system, how much baggage there is to it, like all items with like plus socket stuff supported with stuff, like there's like that has to be like the craziest rework thing they have done yet. Like just for the amount of stuff they have to do and convert, and also like the database people, like they're probably dying like when they think about just how will you like people now have gems in all their gear, right? And then they convert all the characters over to like the different system. Like
the random stash tabs with all these random chess pieces, all these abandoned things. But like it's this whole thing of like, you know, you don't plan a game around like what's the dumb decision I'm gonna make 7 years ago. Like you've kind of just got to like try and go with what you've got. And PoE is in this kind of awkward state where it has a lot of baggage. And if they were making a brand new game, they would remove a lot of this rubbish. Like I can guarantee if they were to make a completely new game, like a new IP, like they went and made their own studio, and they were like, we just want to make this. If they were like, we want to make the spiritual successor to Path of Exile, we would not have every single skill gem. Not like all 300 skill gems would come over. Not support gems would come over, you know.
Yeah.
It sucks, but I feel like a lot of the time with certain video games, you kind of just need to like that's sort of what it is.
Yeah.
And it feels like a cop out, but it's kind of like
Sometimes I think about like I very much like the direction they are taking PoE 2 as in like adding a campaign to the main game and stuff. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if they actually decided to make another like a successor to Path of Exile. Just like how I would love to see how the game looks, and I would probably love to play it as well.
Yeah, it would be really interesting.
They learned so much, but I don't think it's something we're ever going to find out anytime soon. Like,
I mean, it will be one of those things.
It makes no sense business-wise. Or it's like it's way riskier business-wise than making the current PoE 2.
It's something that, like, maybe in 20 or 30 years' time, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like what we saw with David Brevik and like It Lurks Below. Maybe like 30 years from now or something, Neon might make his own like one-man indie game. Yeah. And that is kind of like, oh, that's what he would have done if he had this thing, you know?
Yeah.
Which would be really cool to see. Like, it'd be really cool. But yeah.
I was just gonna talk about something just a little bit more that we were covering, just in terms of the gems themselves, and you know the idea of removing gems, and floating the idea of, you know, we've kind of seen it with legacy unique items in Path of Exile and very choice other items like, you know, an eternal orb and that sort of things that have been completely removed from the game, might still exist or anything like that, but you know, can't really be obtained anymore. And we also see it in the only thing I can think of right now is these card games like Hearthstone and Magic, where there's like vaults, I guess, of things where things go out of the main game. They're still, you know, usable and playable. What do you think Path of Exile would look like if they were to start to implement that in terms of more skills,
like a rotating meta, basically, where like stuff.
Yeah, you know, either a rotating meta or, you know, just into the vault where certain skills could only be used in standard, that sort of thing, just to play around with, or like, yes, Tarke, you have a question or a point.
I've spent $500 on skills, MTX, and now you've removed them from my game. Screw you, GGG. This is a conspiracy of tents, and they're trying to steal my money. And then they rotate it out of the meta, so then I need to buy new MTX with new skills that are in the meta.
Yeah, no, that'd be terrible.
Yeah. The monetization model kind of screws that over. Yeah. But if that wasn't the problem,
I did not even think about that. Yeah,
I still don't think that would work very well. I think PoE also lives from.
I don't think so either. I was kind of playing devil's advocate.
You might accidentally remove like a really cool interaction.
Yeah, that is the thing that I do love about Path of Exile is those weird interactions that you can find with old skills and new supports, or old supports and new skills and that sort of thing, you know, things that people are never playing around with. I love playing with that. And I was going to make that point, you know, comparing to Last Epoch as well and that sort of thing. It's that kind of balancing model is difficult to have those really, really cool things happen. I think they're super cool, whether they're game breaking or not. I love it when they're game breaking, but yeah. It's pretty fun. But yeah,
by the way,
it is very true. Yeah,
I just like scrolled up in the chat and like I was looking at like with the how this whole episode thing started, because I was wondering like what actually like prompted this, and you said an episode on the importance of stuff being weak, being good for the game, and yeah, you want to be a guest for that, like would be a cool topic. And you said that's something you think PoE does terribly. Like, do you remember where that came from?
So. Because I've said a lot of like why it is the way it is, but I think that one thing that Path of Exile is also very guilty of is GGG will be very weird about what they decide is their baby. So for example, they like the fact that you can get like 20 million projectiles and you can get Headhunter and you can get all of these buffs. And there are some things where they've said like we've asked devs before in Bay Class, like, would you ever put a cap on like, and they're like, no. We like the fact that players can get plus 50 projectiles. We like that we haven't capped movement speed. We haven't capped attack speed. And that's like a fundamental philosophy. But that introduces so many problems. And you get like so many like problem things. It's like the whole cluster jewel thing. It's like if they'd capped like some of the aura effectiveness. Like if they could just be like, you can't get over 200% aura effectiveness. But they're like, no. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to let some players get that much, but to make that balanced, you know, alt quality aura has to only give you 0.11% movement speed. And it's because they have this philosophy of like, we don't like putting, you know, and then sometimes they'll break the rule. Like they'll do stuff like Queen of the Forest. Like they ended up capping. And they're like, well, we won't nerf Headhunter, but we'll nerf things around it. GGG is very good at being like, at the time, we will not nerf this mechanic because we like it and we think it's a good interaction. So we're going to nerf everything around the mechanic. And then a year later, they'll nerf the core mechanic, and everything they nerfed around it is dead in the ground, and they won't go back and buff those.
Or not, at least not like until like 3 years.
Or they will,
later.
but it'll be like 4 years later.
Yeah,
like,
when that mechanic becomes the archetype of the patch, basically.
Like that is something that I do think that GG does do terribly, and there's also the fact that there's no clear formula. Like, there's this constant fear of missing out that I have sometimes. I had this with Dark Pact. Dark Pact came out, and I'm like, that looks sick. PTSD, I'm going to play that next league as my league starter. That looks really cool. And they were like, no, that's too strong. We're going to kill it. So they completely killed it for that one patch. And there are other skills which will be, like, way stronger, which they're like, we'll leave that for three leagues. This one, no, this has to die now. And because of that whole thing, you can sometimes not ever know where you stand, and you know, stuff like that is kind of where like I just play the build I want to play. I don't really care about the meta that much. But you do get players who get trapped in that fear of missing out thing, and that aspect of, you know, like, is it too late to start playing the league? And it's like, well, just play whatever. It's that whole kind of mindset. And if GGG had a system of kind of like, okay, we'll always let, you know, a skill have at least one league, so there's like this 2-month period to kind of see where it lies, then they could be maybe a little bit more tactical. But it does sometimes feel like if there is a strategy, we don't know what it is, and it's just kind of like what the person felt like on the day. That is something that I do think that GGG is bad at. But I understand why they do a lot of those things, but I don't think it's the best as a player.
Yeah,
that's the reverse shill Uno.
Yeah,
for me, it's mostly like I don't really like. Sometimes don't get why it happens. Like I understand how it happens. Like especially when you talk about like the different groups and stuff, and people maybe like nerfing stuff, or looking at stuff from different angles at the same time. But I still, with some nerfs, I'm still like, I just can't wrap my head around how that happens. Especially sometimes they do these preemptive nerfs.
Yeah.
Where I think the most recent one that I can think of was the Static Strike thing, where like they basically destroyed Static Strike because they thought it could maybe be broken with what's it called? The war cries, like when they keep up the double damage too long and whatnot. So they made like the damage and everything super low because they thought that could be OP. But then there's other things and other situations where there's an obvious OP mechanic that definitely like everyone points out as soon as they say certain patch note or whatever, and they never preemptively nerf and let it be OP for a league. And there's like certain skills that are very closely watched because they can never be OP, and other skills that are OP for 3 months and no one cares. And I'm always surprised how that happens.
I mean, my go-to, and I think also it depends on because it depends what my mood I'm in. Like I feel more or less passionately. So when this episode would have first aired, it would have been when I was in my whole like trap thing. I think traps are the best example of traps got killed because arc. Like it was part of the reason why I hate arc so much as a skill. So
that was one trap. That was arc trap.
History lesson. So traps used to work completely differently before Incursion. And then Incursion, that was the trap rework league. And then for Incursion, what they did is they removed all the cool charges from traps, and it was like traps of no cooldown. And everyone's like, oh, that'll be really interesting because traps are kind of powerful, but this whole cooldown thing kind of messed them up a bit. And at the same time, they crazy buffed arc. And then arc traps was the best skill. Everyone played it for like 2 leagues in a row. So like, okay, we need to nerf this. So we're going to nerf the trap support gem. And they killed the trap support gem. The trap support gem used to be something like 40% more damage. It now doesn't have any damage multiplier on it.
It just turns it into a trap, right?
It just turns into a trap. And that's a big reason why a lot of people consider traps so much worse than mines, because mines make the skill better, whereas trap just makes it a trap. So you basically lose the support gem. And then they were like, okay, that's not enough. We're going to limit the amount of traps that you can throw at once. They nerfed Cluster Trap. They removed throw additional trapping on
yeah.
gloves. They did all of these changes, and then 2 leagues later, they're like, "We'll nerf Arc. Arc is the problem," and they completely gutted an Arc type because one skill was too strong, and no one was like, "Fire Trap is the problem."
Yeah,
Like no, and it was purely this one thing, and whenever it was that the Ascendancy Urek happened, and I, typed out the whole thing, and I was talking about the trap thing, I mentioned like that Arc thing, and I did have some people being like, yeah, to be fair, looking back on it, like I guess Arcs did kind of like kill that, and it's like,
can you unkill it maybe?
Yeah,
I mean, the funny thing about that is also while they like nerfed the Arc traps, everyone just like, okay, it is Arc Mines now, and it didn't change a thing. Like my first Uber Elder kill was actually on Arc Mines because I was just so ridiculously OP that I just played it like for a little bit. I didn't even push the build very far. I was like, let's try if I can do Uber Elder. Yep, deathless, just insta-phase everything. Okay, cool. Arc Mines is totally balanced, by the way. But that was like right after that. That was in Delve, I think. Yeah, that was like super, super weird balancing. And the Molten Strike thing I mentioned. They got a lot of collateral damage nerfs. Maybe basically, ranged people pick up too much point blank, so we're nerfing that. Molten Strike. And that was, Molten Strike. There was a time where Molten Strike was actually like a really good skill for like
Molten
pushing.
Strike was like the
insane single target.
Yeah.
But that was like when we were just shifting from the clear speed only meta to like a clear speed plus bossing meta. So that, of course, like a skill that like Molten Strike that has great single target with the overlapping AoEs would get like a lot of like attention and then maybe nerfed a bit. But it got like way too much, and then also the Threshold Jewel, like that was so much happening. I think it's a fun skill. It looks cool. I'll always love like the meatball popping out. It always looked hilarious.
It does. Yeah, there is that kind of like that double standard as well, and all of these things that we're talking about as well. GGG do like their very heavy-handed nerfs as well. If they're nerfing something, they're gonna nerf it usually in multiple ways. From what I've experienced,
I feel like
as Tarke was saying, the traps.
Right?
They've probably gotten a bit better.
Like, for example, last league's Carrion Golem nerf, I expected that to be a way bigger nerf hammer than it was.
True, yeah.
But I'm also kind of expecting maybe they'll touch it again next league, and then it's going to be... The thing with GGG is when they nerf something once and it doesn't die, the next patch, it's like, the thing will be destroyed from every angle.
Well, it's also it's difficult because the game power creeps. I feel like the game's power ceiling has never jumped so high league after league after league. It's like the golem changes are fine because of just how stupid it was.
Yes.
But like if we didn't have all the crazy item power level creep, and like if that change happened like 3 years ago, that would be dead. Like the reason why that's still
if you half the damage or something like this, then they like completely.
It was a lot.
If you half the damage of a skill and it's still like the second most played build in Trade League, then probably the nerf was justified and not enough.
I mean, it was the same. We had the same thing with melee skellies back when Elder was the final boss, and it was a level 70 witch in a tabular. You just shove skellies on it. It's like, oh, you can do Uber Elder, and like that's all they need to do. And I think they nerfed skellies by 50% then, and it was still like one of the best single target skills.
It was still like the go-to Awakener killer and stuff later on as well. I think like a lot of the like power creep we currently have is also because of like how exponential scaling is the way we scale damage.
Yes.
And also stuff that we still suffer from or like feel the effects from, like cluster jewels were like a huge jump in power. And basically a lot of the stuff that we still see being OP is like, for example, hatred aura scaling. Also the hatred, I remember when they changed the hatred aura to what it is now, from just more cold damage, added cold from fizz to like more cold and added cold. And
just double the effectiveness for some builds.
And a lot of people were like, this killed my freezing pulse build. I mean, it's worse now for like pure cold builds. And I just looked at it, was like, conversion is already so strong. What is happening here?
Yeah.
And conversion is really strong. And what's happening here? It's still happening. It's still hatred or effect stacking is still crazy. And all that type of stuff is still working.
Like Hollow Palm, Supreme Ego, Hatred. And...
yeah, that stuff as well. And the aura stack, like half-assed aura stacking with hatred and like any conversion build, basically.
Oh, yeah.
But again, this just kind of goes back to the PoE bloat problem. It's like it's nearly impossible to not have collateral in a game this big.
Yes.
It's like
they're
exactly. Balancing with a shotgun in a supermarket. It's like, oh no, we accidentally killed 50 pensioners. It's like, well, what did you think was going to happen? You know.
Yeah,
that was gonna be a bit dark.
But it's the analogy works. It does.
It works. It's a bit dark, but it works. Yeah.
But it works. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Well, that was a lot about balance. That was good. We started. Yeah, that's an hour and a half. Yeah.
I think we went like basically all the different directions at least a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, there's like infinite amount. We didn't even touch on like items and stuff yet, but I think that's not like the.
I will say briefly though, but before we finish, because I feel like you're going to do it, and then we're ending the episode. I would much rather have the current system of either balance changes I don't agree with or whatever, and the meta changes, because my least enjoyable period of Path of Exile for me was between Harby and Legacy, because there was 2 leagues back to back that got delayed, so it was like a 10-month period or something combined with a really unhealthy meta, and I've never hated PoE more. Like I would always rather have some change, even if I don't agree with the change, than no change at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's like a take. I don't think that's a take a lot of people would share. At least like there are definitely people who prefer to keep their fun skill that they're currently having than having a meta that they don't like. I usually feel like I can accommodate. I've played, like as you said, you played like all the builds, and you can probably, if your whatever favorite build gets nerfed, you can probably find a second favorite build and play that, and that's still fine. But I think there are definitely people like remember when they nerfed the custom crit discharge, and like a lot of people, there are actually people quitting the game over this, and not just like a few. There was not a huge group, but there was a group who only played that build, and they left.
Oh yeah,
that was definitely a thing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess the real way to prove if I'm telling the truth or not is invite me back onto the podcast, the league where they delete both traps and course to carry. Be like, hey, you happy for these changes, Tarke? You said it. You'd rather have some change than no change.
I got a message, Rory. Hey, we have to do an experiment here. We have to have one patch where the caustic arrow deals no damage at all, is not playable, and traps are like even worse than they are now. Just for one patch. After that, you can do whatever you want. Just for an experiment. We have a social experiment here.
Social experiment. Yes, please. That'd be good. Yeah. I had something that I was going to say. No, I've forgotten it.
Yeah.
So, no, that's right. Yeah, right before we end the episode. I guess, like, tying it all in a bow, we were just talking about, power creep, especially in Path of Exile and that sort of thing. But, to kind of put on the end of this, it's kind of inevitable in a game like this that numbers are just going to get bigger with balance. I don't think there's any cases or many where a game has lasted, 5+ years where there hasn't been some form of power creep in how it's played, or how it's experienced, right? So it's, it's one thing to go like, remember when we weren't looking for 5 million damage on our builds and we were happy with like 100k and that sort of thing. Why can't we go back there and that sort of thing? But it's, balance just does that, I feel.
I mean, you can design games with horizontal rather than vertical progression. Yeah. But the thing is that PoE doesn't. So if you design your game with vertical progression, then it's
well, true.
If the whole game is about the numbers always going up, then always go up. But there are a lot of games that purposely have a situation where we'll never just give you more numbers, it will give you you can have a bigger AoE, or you can there are ways that you can interact with skills that way. And it's like a lot of people have been asking that support gems go back to being just changing how skills work, because that's how support gems used to be. It was very rare that you had a support gem which gave damage, whereas now it's the opposite, where every support gem just gives damage.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
The thing is, I don't think it actually matters too much if these support gems give similar, all give damage. Then you take the one that gives the damage and has an effect that you also want, if they all have a secondary effect. But currently, there are some that just give more damage and others give less damage, and both don't have different noticeable effect, then you have to just pick the ones that have.
Well, no, but it also has the issue then that if you are playing a skill which requires a utility link, it instantly makes it less attractive because it's like, and that's the whole trap thing is like all non-inherent trap skills have to use this one support gem, so they inherently just have one less. And then, well, why would you use that when you can use it doesn't? And that's where the issue comes in.
Yeah, that's the same with strike skills as well.
Yeah,
if you like this one, and it actually has two. And there are some strike skills that have built-in melee splash or can deal with like ancestral call type stuff differently. But yeah, there's also explodey chest, which fixes like half of them. It's
yes, explodey chest, and with explodey chest, we might leave the podcast with that. I do also agree that it does need deleting. So the eyes have it. So it's going to be deleted in 3.14, and hope we enjoy the league, right?
After they buffed it in 3.13 with the Maven.
Yeah, no, it's staying.
I'm very confident that's going to happen.
It's here. Yeah. No, but thank you so much for coming, Tarke. It's been very fun to have you on again. Right before we do end, what are you up to? And what are your... Well, obviously you got Bayclast happening after the stream on the 8th, which I'm sure that we can follow you on Twitter and get more information about that, or is that the best place?
Yeah, just follow me on Twitter.
Yeah, sick. Twitter.com/TarkeCat, correct? Yeah. Brilliant. Go for it. But anything else going on?
If I ever end up publishing any of the terrible games I'm making, wishlist them on Steam. But like that's in the future. Follow me on Twitter. That's it, basically.
Yeah. Brilliant. Oh yeah, I've got a command for. Oh no, wait, no, that's just the normal shout out command. Damn, I thought I had a special command for Tarke. I've got a special command for Yoji, so I'll do that one there. But Yoji, what are you up to in preparation for 3.14?
As I mentioned a few times, I'm going through all the strike skills in PoE because I want to play such strike skill next patch. No matter the meta, no matter what, I just want to play a strike skill for one. I haven't played one since quite some time, and I was on the fence for last patch, but I kind of decided against it because I didn't know what the Maven endgame looks like, and strike skills are a bit of a rough spot in some content types. But yeah, so I'll go through every single one that we have. I've already made like an Excel spreadsheet. I'll go see how I think I can scale each of them, like what are the upsides, downsides, and that the end result of that will be some sort of guide for people who want to like try out a strike skill in like a spreadsheet form with like lots of notes, for each strike skill, like maybe like a example build as well. I've got at least for my top 5 that I'm considering. And hopefully at the end I will have a strike skill that I want to sleek start with next patch that will not screw me over completely. And yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. That's basically the next few streams, probably like the Easter stream, and then 1 or 2 after that until I'm through the list. Gonna be good.
Nice. Well, I hope you enjoy League starting with Happy Strike. That will be fun to watch.
That was basically already out. It has built-in knockback as a melee skill.
Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? It's it's crowd control and zoning. It's good.
I mean, you can use it with the reverse knockback. It does work, but then you sacrifice the glove slot. It's one of those that don't have built-in melee splash, so it's like it's so bad. But it stuns. Stuns, by the way.
Yeah, it's good. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you once again to Tarke for coming, and Yoji for always being here as a great host who writes up all of the notes for me that I don't look at until the podcast actually starts.
Which is pretty good. But Badger does all the technical stuff, by the way. Like all the uploading of stuff.
And it sometimes works.
He even uploads the VOD onto my YouTube, so he does like literally all the technical stuff. I basically just have to write notes, come here, and maybe sometimes ask someone if he wants to come on the podcast. So
we might hang around for like a few minutes after on the live stream if anyone wants to ask any questions, but we might be ducking out after that. But stick around. But thank you so much for coming. And as always,
follow me on Twitter.